Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Rocket Photography and Camera Launch Trigger VNarCon 2024 session. We'll get the presentation started here in about 30 seconds. Well, again, good morning, everyone. One of the Saturday VNarCon 2024 presentations, photographing rocket launches. I'm Jim Wilkerson, business owner of Tahoma Photography, longtime NAR and EEE member, level 3, and on both the L3CC and TAP. The cover photo here is the Clay Brothers Gemini Joe project flown at Express 2023. It was a huge rocket, and the capsule itself and two of the G.I. Joe-like figures inside were 3D printed. Okay, some session notes. Thank you for attending. The presentation will run about 40 minutes, 10 to 15 minute Q&A to follow. Please save your questions for the end of the session. And per the VNarCon staff, they ask you to put the questions in the Q&A, not the chat, as it fills the chat up if you do that. I joined the NAR in February 1978, Narham section in Maryland. My first camera was a Kodak 110 Instamatic. Some of you may remember those. The flew as part of the NAR championship section at NARM 22 with the Wheaton Association of Rocketry. A little bit of an aside, got to see Phil Barnes from Wheaton. Some of you longtime NAR members may remember Phil. Saw him briefly at the World Space Modeling Championships in Texas this summer. Member of the 1983 Parachute and Streamer Duration and 1985 RCRG NAR Internats teams. Photography background, yearbook staffs in high school and college used a number of film SLRs, and we had Mamiya and Bronica medium format film cameras in college. Those were a lot of fun. Spent 20 years as a pilot in the Air Force in KC-135, C-141s, and C-17s. Not as active in hobby rocketry during that period, but continued with photography. I spent 6 years as end of my career in C-17s in the reserves, and also worked as a Boeing commercial airplanes instructor in the various 7 series, and I continue to work at Boeing through the present day. The photo here is my son Nicholas and I, and at the Balls launch in the Nevada desert a couple of years ago with the 2 cameras with some long-range lenses attached to them, and Peter Thuney, whom some of you may know, took that photo for us. Oh, come on. There we go. Took my first digital camera, Sony point and shoot in 2001, high power in 2001, and L3 in 2004. First digital SLR was a Nikon D70, courtesy of Kent Newman. Again, some of you may know Kent from the hobby, and I've been in the L3CC and TAP for a while. Moved into the digital arena in 2018 with the Nikon Z6, and also started my photography LLC at the time. 2021, we'll talk a little bit about the development later. It ended up having a reliable remote camera trigger system, about 1 mile range. And in 2021, it was my most active rocketry photo year. 2022 and 23 didn't match that, but hopefully we'll pick that back up in 2024. In-depth coverage of the launches listed. I did manage to make TARC, SLI, all of those 4 launches, plus a couple of Central Washington ones. And yeah, there's some another couple of launches in 2022. Interesting side note, one of the club members in MDRA was part of the original Kodak team, or the Kodak team that developed the first digital camera, something 20 plus something years ago. I can't remember the gent's name, but I met him at the Red Glare launch. Here's with my lifetime rocketry friend and mentor, Ed Pearson. Okay, today's topics will cover photography basics, some equipment, the subject characteristics, techniques and settings, types of shots, how to process or processing digital images, and then finally my remote camera system. This is me at Stonehenge in 1982. I was there on a high school class trip. Was able to launch the CINEROC several times at Stonehenge while we were there. If you search Stonehenge on the NAR Facebook page, you'll be able to come up with the video. So some basics, the controls, the main three things you can control as a photographer is the aperture or f-stop, how wide is the opening in the lens. Obviously, the wider the opening, the more light hits the sensor. The shutter speed, how long is the shutter open, how much light gets let in. Typically, rockets move quickly and fast shutter speeds are desirable. And the sensor sensitivity, known as ISO from the film days, the higher the number, the more the sensor can do with a given amount of light. But the higher numbers can lead to graininess or pixelation. The nice thing is that the cameras, especially the mirrorless cameras, have vastly improved the response to the high ISO requirements over the last several years. This is a picture of Buzz Aldrin and Vern Estes at the Museum of Flight in Seattle in 2012. There was a Spaceflight Heroes Gala there, and Tim Dahl and I were invited to take pictures during the event. And Tim also built some scale models that the participants signed, and the models were eventually auctioned off. Equipment, point and shoot cameras. You have an integral lens that may have an electronic zoom that extends a smaller mechanical lens. Those are great for walk around cameras taken on vacations when you don't want to carry a lot of stuff. Can have limited shutter speed and ISO, the sensor capabilities. Digital or non-digital film camera, single lens reflex. There's a mirror. It provides the optical path from the viewfinder out through the lens. The mirror moves up when the shutter button is activated, and the light travels then from the film or digital sensor. And finally, the mirrorless. There's no mirror between the sensor and the lens, so when you look through the viewfinder, you're seeing a video representation. There's no direct optical path between the viewfinder and the lens. Allows for faster shutter speeds and wider apertures. Those of you who are familiar with the apertures under f1, there's 0.95 lenses out there. All cell phones are by definition mirrorless. This is from Florida. I used to travel there a fair bit for work, and my colleague Dave Whitaker and I launching one of the Estes 1/200th RTF Saturn V's sometime. We weren't able to launch it the actual day of when Apollo 11 lifted off, but sometime during the mission. The first field we found was under the approach path to Miami International, so we found a different field. So equipment, like many things in life, the better capabilities you have, the more money it's going to cost. The cell phone, you can have anywhere from under $100 to over $1,000. And a lot of non-native, you get photo apps that come with the camera, but there's a lot of apps you can get that actually are better and make more out of the capabilities of your phone. Consumer DSLR packages, you'll see those at Costco or Walmart or something. You'll get a camera body and a couple of lenses for between $300 and $700. Lens apertures in the f5 to 6.3, and we'll talk about that a little later. Possibly, again, limited ISO capabilities and shutter speed. Move on up to what we call prosumer, combination of professional and consumer. You get better ISO and shutter speed, improved aperture performance on the lenses, and you can find bundles typically in the $800 to $1,500 range. Another photo from our Miami launch, the Saturn V recovering next to a palm tree. Okay, your pro-grade equipment, you get your best performance for the sensor and the shutter speed, 51,000 ISO plus and 1/8,000th shutter speed and faster. The current flagship Nikon Z9 mirrorless camera has shutter speeds up to a 32,000th of a second, and it can take small JPEGs up to 120 frames a second almost. It's a camera, it's a movie, it's two things in one. Your lens apertures in the 1.4 to 2.8 range, so a lot of light gathering capability. The folks you see at the big sporting events down on the field with the long lenses, those are typically in the 2.8 range. It's darker inside, so that's great to have that light gathering capability. Camera body and 1 to 2 lenses can easily top $10,000. Talk a little bit about the sensor size. The full frame, or Nikon calls it FX, it's essentially the sensor is the same size as a 30 piece of 35 millimeter film. There's the crop sensor, smaller sensor, fewer pixels. It's about 2/3 of the size. And medium format, 3 by 4 centimeter negatives or larger, but that's beyond the scope of today's. Typically, the pro cameras are what's called full frame, but not all of them are. Other capabilities to consider are frame rate, or frames per second. Again, I'd mentioned the Z9 can take up to 120 frames a second, which is kind of crazy. But most of your high-end pro digital cameras will be up to, between 10 and 20 frames per second shutter capability. Video's up to 4K. I think it's actually 8K now, shooting raw video. It's today's digital SLRs are essentially movie cameras in and of themselves as well. You can GPS locate and tag, and lots of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity to computer or phone, tablet. Again, I'll use the sports photographers. They have those cameras wired into a or not wired, but connected to a wireless network there at the stadium, and they have people back in the offices pulling images off the camera in real time and using them for quick social media posts. This is not a remote camera image. But it's a 2-stage liftoff shot from balls at the Nevada desert in 2021. Some subject characteristics. Rockets, they're typically small, but can be larger, up to and beyond people size. They're fast moving, and one of the challenges is that you can have the bright plume flame, and then you have the possibly dark rocket. People are fairly tight size range. You have size variations between adults and kids. They typically don't move very quickly, and they don't have the challenges of illumination on the subject that the rockets might have. People and rockets together, hopefully they're stationary when they're in close proximity, and people at an appropriate safe distance in the fore or the background can enhance a liftoff photo. Matt Abbey in Colorado ran NSL in 2021 and will be running NSL West this year. It's his AMRAM flown on a Sparky motor at that field in Colorado. Techniques and settings. We'll talk about background, perspective, the lens aperture, the shutter speed, focus, lighting, image format, and we'll have a summary. This is from NARAM 62. This is Chris Hansen bringing his level 3 rocket out of the cornfield with the evil bean field, and it ate a lot of rockets in the foreground. So I got liftoff photos of Chris's rocket, and he actually called me when he got to the cornfield because I could see where his parachute was, and I was actually watching him through my 400 millimeter lens. I was able to give him a good vector on which to enter the cornfield and start searching for his rocket. Okay, background. Background is important, and the more you practice, the more your eye will tune to the fact what kind of background you're having. First picture here is Trip Barber, longtime NARAM member and founder of the American Rocketry Challenge. But behind Trip is a porta potty, and that kind of distracts you from the image of Trip. The next RSO check-in, focus on subjects, but still the background's pretty busy here. So again, it's a little distracting. The next image, the gentleman holding the large interceptor, again, a little bit less distraction in the background, but still a little busy. Finally, Kip Dodrigas, I hope I'm saying that right, with his test tube rocket. This was either the upper stage or part of the development for the model he flew upwards of 200,000 feet last year. But you can see here, not a lot of distraction in the background, a nice mountain with some sky. So, okay. Perspective. Perspective is important. This is, and I can't remember James Duffy's daughter's first name, but this is her bumper whack scale model at the WSMC championships, the Internats in Texas this last summer. This is me standing and holding the camera, getting the liftoff shot. And this is the right photo is a remote camera I had sitting at ground level, slaved to the camera I was using to take the standing shots. And you can see what a difference some perspective, different angle on the liftoff can be or can make. This is from TARC in 2019. They called it the Fusillade three Nike smokes being launched, and it's essentially the same image, just cropped, but you can see that the sign here, the Raytheon sign, kind of dominates the image. But as you move, as the rockets get higher and the crop becomes a little wider, the focus is more on the rockets themselves. LEM model at NARAM 62. There's again, here's me standing with the Flightline camera. And what's interesting here is we'll talk about depth of field a little bit later, but you can see the distance beyond the camera to the background is quite a ways. And here, the camera's right up close to the subject. The background isn't quite as blurry, but there's less of the background there. But again, kind of an interesting contrast between standing probably 30 to 40 feet away in the flight line and having the camera maybe a foot or two away from the model as it lifts off. So aperture, we talked about that briefly. It's the how wide the lens, how much lens is exposed to provide light to the back of the sensor. So a large aperture, and it's large aperture are shown by smaller f numbers. So an f2.8 is a very large aperture, and f22 is a very small aperture. And what's called shallow, the large apertures produce a shallow depth of field, which means that's the range in which a subject would be in focus. So here you can see the rocket is really well focused, and the rest of the background is somewhat blurry. It's called bokeh, a Japanese term, and especially useful in portrait photography. And also the distance between the subject and the background and the photographer, the photographer was fairly close, not right up next to it, but the background here. And here the subjects and the background are fairly far from the photographer, so they're both in that depth of field range of the aperture of the lens. So a fair bit more of the image is in focus. And here we have a small aperture with a very deep depth of field, and the people in the foreground of the rockets and the terrain behind them all seem to be in recognizable focus. And this is again out at the Black Rock Desert in Nevada, I believe. Okay, shutter speed. Talked a little bit about that. Higher shutter speed for faster moving subjects to avoid the blur. These are photos that I took at the 1985 Internats in Yambol, Bulgaria. The best shutter speed at the time was about 1,000th of a second. Lots of light, but you can see the small, fast moving models fairly blurry, while most of the rest of the image is in focus. Or it's in focus, but just it's the movement that's causing it to be blurry. And the right photo is a Saturn 1B scale model. Again, it's not as blurry, but still a little bit, where the rest of the background is fairly stable. So the basic lesson is the rockets, you typically want a fast shutter speed. I will usually set my shutter speed as high as I can get it. Again, fast shutter speeds, a couple of Kato here on the left at LDRS. You can see it's the rocket, it's essentially stop action. There's the rockets, the parts don't appear to be moving. And then a Can-Am Cup, the rocket separating just off the piston. You can see the individual elements of some of the burning propellant coming out of the nozzle, the smoke trail, and the rocket itself is fairly sharp. There's no real, and interesting, you can also see the heat waves in the background. Similar light in 1985, but much better cameras, and the stop action is noteworthy. The Kato photos, we'll see a couple of those later, can help a flyer in diagnosing possibly what went wrong. Focus is always important. Nobody likes a blurry photograph unless you're doing it for some kind of an effect. This is at one of the Oregon rocketry launches. You can see it's a nice capture of the V2, except it's just a little bit out of focus. Contrast that to the Estes Majestic here at a Washington Aerospace Club launch here in the Seattle area. And it's just what we call in the photo groups tack sharp. You can read the logo very well. The edge definitions of the model are very sharp. Some lighting. As I'd mentioned earlier, the contrast between even a dark rocket and a bright rocket flame can be difficult to deal with. Here on the left image, the rocket's fairly reasonably exposed, but the flame's badly washed out. The rocket in the middle photo is fairly dark. The flame's okay. And then the final photo is a similar main exposure with a linear gradient applied to darken the flame up a little bit. Typically, especially in bright sunlight, I'll underexpose images a little bit, and that helps the flame from being washed out. It's especially noticeable on the red and the green flames. Lighting. On the left, yours truly, one of my early Estes rockets at the student parking lots on the University of Maryland campus sometime in the late 1970s. You can see the bright sky behind me, so my face and my front is dark, and you can see the shadows here. Picture would have been better if it had been taken from the other side with the sun lighting my face. I'll use fill flash when I'm walking around, especially on the bright desert launches. That helps me have a nice even exposure on subjects' faces. Here, this is at the LDRS 39 on the Bonneville Salt Flats. You can see the shadows. The subjects are, the sun is lighting the subjects from behind, but the fill flash gave me a nice a frontal exposure of the subjects. Frank Burke with one of his amazing radio-controlled rocket gliders. Aerotech's best customer for the H-13 motor. Okay, we'll talk about sensors and image types. Again, mentioned that the two main sensor sizes, the Nikon FX or full frame and the crop sensor. Almost any camera you can buy until you get into the medium format cameras are one size or the other. Image types, you have a raw image, and I've come to find out since I started this presentation through one of the Nikon reps that the raw image was developed for law enforcement specifically, so you could have an image that if you were shown a raw image, it was undoctored, because anytime you edit a raw image, it becomes something else. It becomes a JPEG or a PNG or a TIFF file. But to print out a photo, to post it online, it typically requires post-processing into a JPEG or other format. They can be very large files, but you've got all the data that the camera sensor sees. So if you're looking to do some heavy editing, that's the best image to have. JPEG is a common photo compression standard that allows quick use for display and printing. In-camera corrections can be applied in advance. Most of the pro cameras, you can adjust things like brightness and contrast, noise reduction, things like that. And this is a Thor on a Sparky motor at NARAM 62. Sparky liftoff photos are one of my favorite things, but again, they can be challenging, especially if it's a bright day, to bring out all the definition in the plume. Again, then JPEGs, there's smaller files for faster transfer and editing. And Mark, I see you posted Campbell Duffy. Thank you in the chat. Let's see. Setting summary for rockets. I'll use manual aperture and shutter speed. I'll set the camera on manual focus and ISO. I'll shoot the aperture wide open, the shutter speed as fast as I can get. A lot of times, as I mentioned earlier, I'll adjust the ISO to slightly underexposed, so the rocket plume flame isn't quite as blown out. These are for launch photos. And focus, this is an important thing to remember when you're shooting, especially liftoff photos. I'll use the autofocus to get close, but I'll use manual for liftoff. Depending on the focus point type that you're using in the camera, it's very easy for that focus point to shift off the rocket and into the background behind it, and then you just get a blurry rocket photo. So let's see, people, auto or program, fill flash and bright outside settings. So people aren't moving around much. I don't have to worry as much about the shutter speed. And again, as I'd mentioned in a couple slides ago, use the fill flash, and it was used here to make sure that people are nicely lit. And what it especially does, if it's a sunny day, you can see they're both wearing caps. If you've got a cap on without the fill flash, you get shadows either fully or partially on the face, and that takes a lot of time to deal with in post. So the fill flash is an easy fix for that. Many cameras, any of the pro cameras and most of the consumer cameras will have the ability to save settings. The lower end ones will have a U on the dial that stands for user, so you can preset those. The more advanced cameras, the D5s, D6s on the Nikon end and Z9s will have something called photo banks, where you can go in and save a setting, and you just go into the camera menu and select which bank you use, and the settings that you like to have are automatically there. LDRS 62 Honest John HPR flight. This is another example of the shallow depth of field. The rocket itself is in focus with the blurry background called bokeh. Types of shots. Again, rockets, we talked about, you can do liftoff shots, smoke trails, recovery, and carnage. Carnage is especially interesting in photographs. People in rockets will do prep area and RSO, will do pad prep. Post-flight, people walking back with big smiles on their faces after they found their rocket. Launch crew, those folks work hard, cover them, make sure they get some recognition. And then finally, the group photos. This is a sport flight from NARAM 62. Okay, people interactions, very important. My early days covering rocket photography after I'd been married, when I come back and my wife says, you could take pictures of people too. You don't only have to take pictures of rockets. So I do tend to focus on that. The type of interactions, they're posed. This is a posed photo at LDRS 39, surprised and spontaneous. One thing to remember, some people don't want their photo taken. Some people, I've been asked a number of times, you can take my photo, but please don't post it on social media. What seems funny or amusing to you may be embarrassing to the subject, and have extra care when you're taking images of children and minors. Parental concerns, if I'm taking kid pictures and the parents are around, I will typically interact with the parents and make sure they understand what I'm doing. And overall, be polite, courteous, and amenable to your subject's concerns. And then the rocket shots, liftoff shots, that classic in a number of variations. Smoke trails. The one on the left is interesting. This is on the way home after the 1985 Internats. We'd picked up some rockets and some motors from the international teams and just decided to go out behind the hotel where we were staying somewhere in Yugoslavia. And I wasn't quick enough on this, but high altitude flight at Balls in the center photo, some very interesting perturbations in the smoke trail. And then a sparky plume. Again, that's out in the Nevada desert. Recovery. I didn't used to shoot recovery shots all that much. I didn't find them terribly interesting, but I did discover that people sometimes like to see their rockets fully deployed and coming back down. So, and either airborne or touchdown, those can be interesting variations. Glider recoveries. These are a couple of Frank Burke's RCRGs. This is the Klingon D7. This is actually flown by Bernard Colley at one of the Washington Airspace launches. And this is one of Frank's birds at, I think, at an Oregon rocketry launch at some point. Carnage. It's amazing what the stop action will do to alter your perception of, because your mind is watching this thing happen and it's difficult to process. But if you can go back and get a good series of 10 to 15 to 20 frame photos of the event, they're interesting, but they can also be helpful to the flyer in diagnosing problems. So this is a double Deuces Wild at MDRA in 2022. This is a Balls Cato, a very large research motor from a fair distance away. And then this is at there's some kind of I think unfortunately it was a level 3 cert at Balls in 2023. The Sparky motor came apart. You can see you've actually got either the casings come apart or the closures have both come apart, because you can see the flame coming out both ends. Prep area, people working on their rockets. And then this one here is another blast from the past. This is Matt Steele and Mike Michi at the 1985 Internets in Yambol, Bulgaria. Mike's working on his S8E model, RCRG. RSO and check-in. Again, another variation. And this is the Hamster Dance group, including AirTech founder here on the left, Gary Rosenfield, at Balls in 2023. Pad prep, again, loading rockets on the pad. I'll mention Solo Dan later. Solo came to the last high power launch at Scott Binder's farm in 2003 and really did a great job photographing. He'd never been to a launch before, but he gave us all CDs afterwards with the photos. And that really started me on the idea of getting good high power rocket shots. Excuse me. Let's see here. And kid pictures, adults helping kids, always a great thing, and especially promoting the NAR, getting the kids involved and parents mentoring, parents or other adults mentoring them. Launch crew, this is an LDRS 39. Former EEE board member Neil Baker is the launch director, but again, these folks work hard and it's nice to recognize them and the efforts they're making sometimes. Recovery, walking through the sage out in Aurochs field in Brothers, Oregon, and then Bryce Chain's crew picking up the big sumo after touchdown at LDRS 39. Group photos, the lineup at Red Glare at MDRA in 2022, and the group photo at Sod Blaster at Tri-Cities Rocketeers launch in Pasco, Washington this last fall. Spontaneous, this is a posed shot of Kai Michelson and his son Buddy with I think it was an Moto project. And then NAR and EEE members, Steve Shannon and Gerald Mew. This is a spontaneous shot, but it's one of those I turn around and they're looking at something on the horizon and it's just one of those your mind clicks and goes, that's a really nice photo of the two of them, and let's go ahead and get it. Okay, we'll move on to processing digital images. There's commercial editing programs. Probably everybody, most of the folks in the world who own a computer have heard of Photoshop. The actual photo processing program that Adobe runs is called Lightroom, and kind of a play on Darkroom. The controls on it are very similar to the controls that you used to have to do by hand in a photo lab, developing film and printing, making prints. As I'd mentioned earlier, your raw image has to be post-processed into another format. You can't post raw images online or make prints out of them. JPEGs can be printed, uploaded online straight out of the camera. Your cell phones and tablets can process images with native apps. Any of the Photos programs on iPhones or tablets or your Android phones. It's very easy and very powerful editing tools. And again, the aftermarket apps are available, more editing options. Lightroom has, and I don't know about Photoshop, but Lightroom has apps for both tablets and phones. And then Wi-Fi or Bluetooth connectivity for acquiring camera images. I can turn on the Wi-Fi on my digital SLRs and connect them to my tablet or my phone and grab images and then post them fairly quickly. My workflow, if I'm out on the field, I'll do, after a series of launches, I'll do 1 or 2 uploads from a camera. We'll do some light processing and then put them on social media. I'll also do panoramic flight line shots with my cell phone at launch. I've done that at TARC and some of the other launches. For computer, I'll use a physical link, the card into a reader or direct to the camera for file transfer. I'll do a quick scan with my laptop photo viewer to call out the images that they're out of focus or they're repetitive or they're just I just somehow missed the photo I was trying to get, and then I'll import the reviewed images to my Lightroom photo processing program. This is a moonrise shot of from Brothers, Oregon, at one of the Auroch launches. Okay, remote camera system. Started work on this back in the late 2010s needed to remotely trigger cameras at over 1,000-foot range. Extended safety distances required for large or complex projects. And if you're taking them, even with the really long lenses, you'll require significant cropping. And the other problem is you'll always have the atmospheric effects between you and the model at anything over 500 feet. And if it's a hot day out in the desert or even on a field, it's very easy to have a significant amount of atmospheric interference, especially liftoff close to the ground. Your commercially available triggers are going to have a limited range. They'll be 50 to 100 feet. And the requirement to have a plug-in camera, push button triggers that can be activated by closing a relay. The basic problem is reliable wireless connectivity. And you can see Wilson FX is one of the popular wireless remote launch controllers. So the capability is out there. And then a camera located close to the launch pad, much better images. So this is an example of Bryce Chain's flight of the Gates Brothers Sumo rocket at LDRS-39. You can see the original image in the crop. You can also see the remote camera that I'll show some images in the foreground. That's the remote camera on the tripod up close to the model. But you can see what a small portion of the negative that any kind of an interesting image has. My first attempt was a relay triggered with an audio input. I was using ham and FRS handhelds to transmit a signal, an audio trigger signal. Not really good reliability. It was subject to static and other traffic on a selected frequency. My second attempt was some commercial systems, things like they have controllers for water sprinklers out in farmers' fields, things like that. I found that the advertised range was almost always significantly overstated, and sometimes 1/10 of what they claimed in the advertising. So my current system, I was fortunate to run across a retired electrical engineer who was interested in solving this problem with me. So I have a system with Arduino controlled relays and a trigger box on the flight line. The communication with stacked LoRa Shield boards in the 433 megahertz range. And it's tested to 1 mile range with the directional antenna. So I've got Yagis, and that's an interesting thing. We have signal strength meters on the transmitter and receiver, and just panning the Yagi antenna through a range of directions related to the box, you can see the signal strength change, which I've always found that interesting. It's highly reliable, and again, I'll set that up, and I'll have my Flightline camera ready to go, and I'll have the box next to me. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I trigger my Flightline camera, and at the same time, I'm pressing the trigger button on my Flightline relay. And you can see here, this is a much improved image. This is the original image, and this is the crop of that same Sumo liftoff. I just get much more of the negative, much more usable area of the image to edit. Future efforts, there's a MYOPS remote trigger. Some of you may have heard of that. It's you can do sound movement or laser beam break. And also the Nikon Z9 has native in-camera motion detect. So I'm going to be working on using those capabilities during this flying season. Here's another example of a large 2-stage project at Bals, a team called 2Wien, student team out of Austria. And the image on the left is the remote camera liftoff shot. The image on the right is the flight line shot from a distance of about 2,500 feet. And it's recognizable as a rocket, but if I were to zoom in on the rocket itself to try to get a similar image like this, it really would not be a very usable image. Another remote shot, Ken Overton's massive P-motor project at Bals this last year in 2023. Some more remote images. Again, I really love the Sparky liftoffs. This is Braden Carlson, I believe it's Braden's Iris. And some more remote images here. I believe that was Buddy and Kai Michelson. I believe that's the rocket in that picture earlier. This is a hybrid, an R hybrid project by a gentleman named Alex Pavlik out of Florida, really doing some impressive work. If you're on the Tripoli Facebook page ever, and he posts time to time the machining work he does, it's really pretty incredible. LDS 40, some remote camera images there. This was a big, like a 10 times upscale Trident. Unfortunately, the motor cadoed and it was destroyed, but it was a pretty impressive flight. Another project called Andromeda at Balls. Another example of perspective. I got the camera low to the ground looking up at the rocket, and it's always nice. Make sure you have the lens very clean, but it's always nice to get the sunburst shots in the background. And then those are the flight line images of the Andromeda liftoff. And again, there's the similar remote camera images, and you can really see the difference. Oh, there we go. You can really see the difference in the quality of the images with the remote camera. And finally, a couple relatively recent ones from Sod Blaster in 2023 out in Tri-Cities. Frank Burke's impressive Genie. This is a Washington State University team, their rocket from the Spaceport America Cup. Again, these are the flight line images, me standing and holding the camera. And these are from the static remote camera out at the pad. Really beautiful upscale Estes Nike X. The green flames are really cool if you can get them well exposed. And a couple more, another Sparky. Really have to brag on Frank Burke. He does this amazing work with these radio-controlled rocket gliders, his Colonial Viper and Estes Interceptor. Okay, some random thoughts. Online photographs, a little plug for digital rights management. If you see a photo you like on the NAR Facebook page, if you see it on someone else's website, please ask someone permission before you just copy or screenshot a photo. The photographer maintains ownership unless those are granted. The photographer doesn't waive those rights by making a social media post. If you have a photo vendor to launch, they're out there working hard. Let's see. Chuck Haskins is one I remember, Nadine, obviously. A number of folks out there. Some folks give the photos away. Some folks are making it a business and they bring lots of expensive equipment and years of experience in. So, and you see a photo with the watermark on it and you say, oh, well, if I repost that, then I'm giving them free advertising. That's not really free advertising. If you buy a photo from someone and you credit them, that's really the intent of free advertising. Sport rocketry photo submissions, lots of opportunities to see your work in print. If you're going to send photos in, please, a good quality high-res photographs, 2400 pixels long edge with a 200 DPI minimum. And if you don't understand what that means, Todd Schweiman and I are always happy to help you out. If you edit your photos, you crop them, enhance them, adjust the lighting, the saturation, etc. Even your basic photos programs on your Mac or PC or phone or tablet will give you some pretty powerful tools to edit photos. If you're taking a picture with your cell phone and it's a bright sunny day outside and it looks like there's fog, that probably means you got some nice fingerprint smears on that cell phone lens. Go ahead and give that a good swipe with the cleaning cloth. And again, Todd Schweim and I always happy to assist if you've got questions with if you're looking to submit photos to the Sport Rocketry. Some acknowledgement, everybody owes debts to mentors, supporters, and collaborators. Some folks I'd like to recognize. Again, old Ed Pearson. Ed's probably the reason I was interested in the hobby, but Ed really made it easy for me to get involved and continue in the hobby. Now almost over 45, I go closing in on 50 years. This is Ed at NARAM 62. Herb Dezen, Mr. Cinerock. I grew up about 5 miles away from Herb, and he, as a teenager, even before I could drive, Herb would come grab me, and we would go fly Cinerocks. And he also had me shoot liftoff photographs, and really kind of cemented the idea of rocket photography My cert officials, Dennis Winningstad and Pat Gordzlik, John Lingdahl, Trip Barber, Stu Barrett, and Steve Shannon, great examples of volunteerism and paying it forward in the hobby. Again, I mentioned Solo Dan earlier. His photos at Fire in the Sky 2003 really showed me how great high power rocket photography can be. And a number of regular photo collaborators, Rick Clapp, Gary Gonsher of OROC, Chuck Haskin, Neil McGivray, formerly of the Rockets magazine, Kent Newman, Todd Schweim, one of the VNARCon coordinators, and Peter Thoney, and another gent, Matt Dale or Dolly, I'm sorry, I'm probably mispronouncing it, but had some great photos of Kip Dodrigus space shot last year. Questions. Thanks for attending. This is me at the Student Launch Initiative in Alabama last year with a couple of photos. You can see the rocket rack in the background. And just as a nod to all the discussions lately on the NAR forums about NAR number and year, this is an image of my original NAR card from February 78. See the expiration date of 279 and my contest meet results from one of the Mars launches in the fall of 1978. Here's the URL for all my rocket photography, and you'll be asked for a name and an email address when you log on. And typically I do that because the images will have minors in them, and I just like to keep a record. I don't do anything else with those names and email addresses. And that QR code will take you directly to that web address. Okay, I am here for questions for the next 5 or 10 minutes. I'm going to stop sharing so you can see my face, and happy to answer any questions that people might have. I see okay, Thomas Fetter. Lightroom's gotten quite expensive, gone to a subscription model, that's agreed. Thomas, I know there are out there, the names escape me at the moment. But again, if you're not looking to do professional quality editing, the Windows and Mac laptop photo programs are really quite powerful. Good photo apps for an iPhone that might be a better job than the native. You can get the Lightroom. I would search on the App Store. I've just used the native iPhone. I actually have an Android. I have a Google Pixel, so that's what I'm more familiar with. But again, the native photo app on the Google Pixel is really pretty powerful. Other questions? I have not really ever taken a formal course. Do you have any formal training in photography, or did you build your skills purely through experience? Would you recommend photography courses, or aren't they applicable to rocket photography? I would highly recommend taking photography courses. If I'd gone, 20/20 hindsight, I would, and who knows, I may end up going and taking some eventually, just to validate what I think I'm actually doing. But yes, my experience has mostly been built. I had a lot of mentors in the high school. High school, we really didn't focus on much beyond providing photos, but the 2 years I spent in college yearbook I had a lot of really good mentors there, and especially the experience of both developing and printing film really really provided me with a great background in using the digital editing tools. Please go full screen with my video. Hmm. Okay, I am not really sure how to go full screen with my video. I don't know, Ed or Todd, are you on? Oh, is that any better? Ken, I hope I'm saying this right, Hoym or Hoyme, can you speak to photo composition? Sure. One of the big things I talked about that a little bit is background, seeing what is behind your subject. Is your composition going to highlight the subject, or is the background clutter going to be so busy that the subject's kind of lost in it? And that just takes practice. You got to go out and one day the flip's going to switch, and your mind's really going to focus on what's behind the camera. I will shoot both horizontal and vertical orientations. I will usually try to center the subject in the middle of the frame, especially when I'm dealing with people. But on the other hand, there's times when if you say you're looking at a rocket on the pad, people on the side or beneath the rocket um, be as well. There's the rule of thirds. I'm not going to, there's plenty of information on that. I'm not going to go into that too much here, but essentially it divides the image into thirds, and putting either the subject or other parts of it in various sections is a kind of a classic method of photo composition. Let's see. Really, the ultimate goal is to have the image, one, to tell a story, and two, to really highlight what are you trying to what's your focus, and typically that's the subject, either the rocket or the person. When using manual focus, how do you determine the focus spot for liftoff? Glenn, I will usually focus. It depends. If it's a fairly large rocket, it's easy enough to focus on the rocket itself. If not, if it's say a small rack of low power models, I'll typically focus on the base of the launch pad, or a point somewhere in the middle of the launch rack itself. Larry Giggle, how do you tend to shoot raw or JPEG? Do you do lens correction, and if so, do you do it on the camera or post processing? Since I use the third party lens, I'm stuck doing it in post, which can be an annoying extra step. I I use I'll typically shoot JPEG, Larry, unless I'm really looking. For example, I'll go out in the desert and I'll do sunset images, things like that. I'll switch to RAW, but mostly it's JPEG because I find I just don't need um, I don't need the amount of data in a raw image. Um, I shoot Nikon cameras, and I mostly have Nikon lenses. So I'll do that in post. I don't do the lens correct, especially the mirrorless cameras. It's not quite as much. My digital SLRs, I'd get the software and I'd go out and shoot the target and run the camera program and do the lens correction. Um, Apply the lens corrections inside the camera, but these days it's mostly in post. Okay, we've got about 3 minutes left in the session. I I do post on Instagram, JMW Tahoma Photo, and you'll see me post on the NAR and the Triple E Facebook pages from time to time. You can contact me there. My contact information, um, as a board member, you can also reach me through the NAR website. I have heard good things about Sony cameras. What is your opinion? The only Sony camera I've ever owned was my first digital point and shoot. So I know people in my sports photography group that love Sonys and work with them. I know people are very successful. The one thing I have heard, although I've never really dealt with them, is that the menu structure is less intuitive than it is on the Nikons and Canons, but that's secondhand information. I've never actually experienced it myself. But they certainly wouldn't be as successful as they are selling the cameras if they weren't good cameras. Okay, we've got about a minute left. Any final questions? Digital SLR versus mirrorless. I really like the mirrorless, the reduced size and weight and the enhanced capabilities. Although I do, honestly, I have been using my D6 for sports photos the last couple weeks, and I really enjoy the sound of the mirror clacking behind it. But um, mirrorless is the way of the future. Eventually, the major camera corporations are going to stop supporting them, but I get very good work out of both DSLRs and mirrorless. But the functionality as far as the frame rates, the shutter speeds, and especially if the things I'm going to work on this year, the motion detect, the mirrorless really do have some amazingly expanded capabilities over the digital SLRs. Okay, we're coming to the end of the session. Thanks everybody for attending. Feel free to look over the online photos, and again, any photo questions, please always feel free to reach out to me or to Todd Schweim, and hope to see you at NSL West and NARAM this year. Bye-bye.